Hey guys, so in today's training, what I'm going to be talking about is 4 ways that poor posture can affect your nervous system. So the first way is that it can create um, nerve compression. So by slouching and having a rounded posture, it affects the positioning of our skeletal system, our bones, and hence it can start to press on nerves. So if you imagine when we're posturally aligned up really well, there's certain spaces for nerves to have their impulses travel through. And as soon as we start to misalign things, so, there's nerves that run under the pecs through here when our shoulders come forwards and we get really tight through there, that can put pressure on those nerves and it affects their ability to send those messages along those pathways. And that can create, in some cases, pain. It can create numbness, tingling sometimes, and even weakness in muscles because it affects your ability to activate the muscle if the nerve impulse can't get to it. And it can also affect blood flow. So it can affect blood vessels. So if you imagine, like at the base of the occiput at the back of the skull, if you've got a very forward head posture and your skull is tilted back on your cervical spine there's blood vessels, there's nerves that run up through the neck to the brain, so they can get pressure and get compressed, and that blood flow can get affected, and in that case it can cause headaches and things like that. But also the restricted blood vessels, the same as the nerve tissue, is that can affect so nerves need a good healthy supply of blood flow and nutrients to keep them healthy. So that can affect the nerve tissue as well from having a lack of blood flow. Next up, it can create muscle imbalances. So if we imagine the upper body, so if our shoulders are very far forwards, that's going to decrease the so if the nerves can't feed the muscles, then that is going to affect their ability to innervate the muscles and send the impulse there. So we can get decreased activation. So if you imagine through the upper body, through the middle of the upper back, we can have weakness and the muscles become very lax and they're not even, they're overstretched. And then the muscles at the front have the opposite effect where they can become overactivated. And that can create stiffness and tightness in the body because we just have a lack of mechanical efficiency. The joints, when they're in perfect posture, everything can just glide and move very freely and with very little interference. But when things are out of alignment, the joint mechanics get affected. Something that I commonly see is when people have very poor rounded shoulders, they quite often, because their thoracic spine, their upper back is rounded, they can't press overhead because they're lacking, their arms are going as high as they can, but because the upper back's rounded, they're lacking that thoracic extension, so the upper back, to be able to reach up overhead. So it starts to affect their movement mechanics, in your everyday life, but it also affects your ability to perform exercises with good technique. So that muscle imbalance, the length tension relationships between opposing muscles can affect the mechanics of each of the joints in your body. It can create chronic pain and inflammation in the body. So when the joints are misaligned, it creates a lot of stress. So a common thing that can happen is you may have seen people with really poor posture, through the upper body, they develop what's called a dowager's hump. And it's almost like the humpback of Notre Dame. So it's like a bit of a bump there. And what it is that in that particular case is because the posture is so poor, this particular joint right here in the neck, it's having so much strain on it because the weight of the head is forwards, and that joint is becoming hypermobile. So the body will always adapt, and it will lay down almost like ligamentous tissue, extra tissue there to try and stabilize that joint because it's got so much strain through it. And that's where people end up with that dowager's hump. And that can happen, all sorts of different joints can be affected by that overstressing and that misalignment. As I said before, when everything is stacked up in the right alignment, it's very efficient and there's very little energy that your body has to use. It doesn't have to resist against gravity being pulled forwards. It can also can create continuous strain and overusing muscle. So we've got strain in the joints, as I mentioned, with that as an example of that dowager's hump, but also in the muscles. The muscles become very tight and stiff, and they can just feel like achy because they're just overworked all the time. And then the other muscles, the ones that are the opposite muscles that are very lax, they're actually also getting a lot of strain on them as well. So quite often when you've got rounded shoulders, the strain and pain you feel is in the upper back because those joints and muscles have that constant pull on them from the muscles at the front. And when we get inflammation in the body, our body produces chemicals that can aggravate and irritate that nerve tissue as well, which also leads to pain in the body. And finally, postural adaptation. So postural adaptation can be a good thing or a bad thing, but in this case, we're getting poor postural adaptation. So what actually happens is the nervous system and the muscular skeletal system become almost the default setting of your body is rearranged to be that this is poor posture. This is normal. And if I did a postural course many years ago when I did remedial massage, and we had a teacher who was an expert in this, and he got one of the students out he was quite a tall guy. He's about 6'3" or 4", but he had a very rounded posture, as a lot of people that are very tall because they have to fit into cars and things that aren't built for them. And the teacher put him in proper posture. He reset his posture, and he was probably an inch taller when he lined him up. And he said to him, "How does that feel?" And he said, and the student said, "That just feels so weird and wrong," because his postural setting had been reset. His default setting was now rounded and forward, and that felt normal to his muscular system and his nervous system. He'd been programmed into that. So what we need to do is to reset that, and it can be challenging, but the way that we can reset it is that we need to reset the length tension relationships between opposing muscle groups. So if we talk about the shoulders and the upper body, if we've got a very tight chest, upper abdominal area, that's going to pull us forward and into a rounded posture, and hence the upper back muscles, the shoulder blades are going to spread apart, and we're going to have that constant pull forwards into that posture. So in order to reset that, and that's what we're doing in our exercises, is that we're lengthening out the muscles that are tight. So we're resetting their positioning, and we're also strengthening and resetting the opposing muscles that are too lengthened out. And in that order. So if we stretch first, then work on the strength, that's the best way to reprogram. But you also have to be very, very aware. We can do all the exercises in the world, but if you're spending 8 hours sitting at a desk like this with rounded shoulders, you're never going to be able to out-exercise that by doing a 10, 15 minute, 20-minute workout. Okay, we have to be aware, consciously aware of our postural habits and line ourselves up, do the strength work, do the stretch work, sit nice and tall and in good postural alignment, and reset that default setting in your body.